This little street urchin stops a millionaire from pulling the plug on his son, but moments later, something shocking happens. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The echo of bare feet resonated through the pristine hallways of the private hospital, a stark contrast to the solemn silence that dominated the luxurious environment. The 4-year-old street urchin ran desperately, her tattered clothes flapping like rags in the wind, as nurses and security guards tried to intercept her. Her panting breath echoed off the marble walls, each step a struggle against the rapidly dwindling time. "Don't kill him!" The child's scream cut through the air like a knife, paralyzing everyone in the main hallway. Doctors turned, visitors froze in their chairs, and the echo itself seemed to linger for an eternity between the white, sterile walls. At the center of the commotion was the 30-year-old widowed millionaire, a man whose impeccable matinee idol looks contrasted painfully with the devastation in his eyes. His bespoke suit, made from fabrics that cost more than many people earned in a year, seemed like inadequate armor against the pain that consumed him. His fortune in dollars, accumulated through astute stock market investments and cryptocurrency ventures, had become irrelevant in the face of the one thing money couldn't buy: his son's life. The 4-year-old boy had lain motionless in the hospital bed for 6 long months, connected to machines that sustained his fragile existence. The doctors had declared the case hopeless, and the father, physically and emotionally exhausted, had finally made the most devastating decision of his life. The papers authorizing the removal of life support were in his trembling hands, his signature the only barrier between his son and the inevitable. The street urchin, who looked only 2 years old due to her extreme frailty, forced her way through the security guards with a determination that defied her small stature. Her dirty hands grabbed the white coat of the head doctor, a man in his late 50s whose decades of experience saving lives had created a shell of professional skepticism. "Doctor, he can hear," the child whispered in a voice hoarse with desperation. "He's trying to wake up, but something is stopping him. Please don't let them do this." The doctor bent down to the girl's level, prepared to dismiss her with the condescending gentleness reserved for children's fantasies. But something in the child's eyes made him hesitate. There was an intensity there, a knowledge that seemed impossible for someone so young and obviously neglected by life. "How do you know this, little one?" he asked, more out of professional curiosity than genuine interest. The girl's answer was a whisper so low that only the doctor could hear it. The words she spoke caused the doctor's experienced face to transform completely, his eyebrows rising in an expression of genuine shock. "Cancel the procedure," he ordered abruptly, rising with an urgency that caught the entire medical team by surprise. The widowed millionaire felt the world spin around him. "What's happening?" "Doctor, we agreed that it was the only humane option." "I need to review some tests," the doctor replied, avoiding the father's confused gaze. "There's new information that needs to be considered." The street urchin took a few steps back, observing the confusion she had created. Her large, expressive eyes fixed on the millionaire's face, studying him with a disturbing intensity. There was something familiar in his features, something that stirred fragmented memories in her traumatized mind. The security guards finally reached her, their hands firm but gentle closing around her skinny arms. "Come on, kid. You can't stay here." But as she was led away, the girl turned one last time, her eyes meeting those of the devastated father. "He's waiting for you," she said, her voice carrying a certainty that made the man's heart race inexplicably. The millionaire stood in the hallway for several minutes after the child left, the authorization papers still trembling in his hands. His rational mind, trained for years in business and investments, insisted that it had just been the delusion of a disturbed child. But something deep in his chest whispered otherwise. That night, He stayed by his son's bedside for hours, watching the small chest rise and fall with the help of the machines. The boy seemed so fragile, so lost in that sea of tubes and monitors. His wife, who had died in a terrible accident, used to say that a child's love could move mountains. Maybe, just maybe, love could also awaken someone from a sleep that was too deep. Outside, in the dark streets of the metropolis, the street urchin found shelter under a canopy near the hospital. Her thoughts were confused, full of fragmented images that she couldn't completely organize. But one thing was certain: she would be back tomorrow, and the next day, as many times as necessary, until someone finally listened to what she had to say. Over the next 2 weeks, the street urchin became a constant presence around the hospital. Every day, promptly at 7 in the morning, she appeared at the main gates, always being expelled by security, but always returning with a persistence that baffled the staff. Her determination was as unwavering as it was inexplicable for a child so small and seemingly abandoned by fate. The widowed millionaire began to notice her presence during his daily visits to his son. Through the 5th-floor windows, he watched her walking through the hospital gardens, her movements cautious, like those of a wounded animal that still held hope. There was something in the girl's posture that intrigued him deeply, a mixture of fragility and strength that seemed familiar. The head doctor, for his part, couldn't forget the words the child had whispered in his ear. During decades of career, he had learned to separate science from superstition, but something about that conversation bothered him like a pebble in his shoe. He decided to meticulously review all the boy's exams, looking for details that might have been overlooked. It was during this review that the first disturbing discovery came to light. The levels of sedatives in the child's blood were consistently higher than prescribed in the medical records. A subtle but significant discrepancy for an experienced professional. Someone was administering additional medication without official medical authorization. Meanwhile, the millionaire's stepmother made her appearance at the hospital for the first time in weeks. A 45-year-old woman with an impeccable appearance, maintained by expensive treatments and a calculating gaze that rarely showed genuine emotion. She had married the millionaire's father 3 years before his premature death, inheriting a privileged position in the family, but without direct access to the main assets and funds, which remained under the son's control. "Darling," she said, placing a gloved hand on her grieving stepson's shoulder, "we need to talk about the little one's situation. The medical costs are becoming astronomical, and prolonging this suffering is cruel for both him and you." The millionaire subtly moved away from the touch. Since the loss of his wife, the relationship with his stepmother had become strained and formal. He respected her position in the family, but had never felt a genuine connection with the woman his father had chosen in his later years. "Financial resources are not a problem," he replied coldly. "My assets can sustain the treatment for decades if necessary." "It's not just about money," she insisted, adjusting the gold rings on her fingers. "It's a matter of compassion. You need to accept that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let go." At that moment, through the window, they both saw the street urchin being escorted out of the building again. She didn't resist physically, but her eyes remained fixed on the upper windows, as if she knew exactly where to find those who needed her help. "Who is that child?" asked the stepmother, a note of irritation in her voice. "Why does she keep showing up here?" "Nobody knows," murmured the millionaire, watching the girl disappear among the trees in the garden. "But she was the one who made the doctor cancel the procedure last week." The stepmother's face hardened almost imperceptibly. "A street kid influencing important medical decisions? That's absurd. You need to take control of the situation before these interferences cause more damage." 2 days later, the street urchin managed to bypass security in an unexpected way. During the afternoon shift change, she hid behind an ambulance and managed to enter the building through the underground parking lot. Her small, silent feet led her through the familiar corridors to the 5th floor, where she knew she would find the boy who constantly occupied her thoughts. When she finally reached the room, she found the millionaire sitting next to the bed, holding his son's inert hand. The man was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't immediately notice the child's presence at the door. "He likes it when you sing," said the girl softly, making the man jump. "How did you get in here?" he asked, but his voice carried no anger, just surprise and growing curiosity. "I know where security doesn't look," she replied, approaching the bed with cautious steps. "My mother used to sing to me when I was sick. She said that songs reach places that words can't reach." The millionaire watched the girl position herself on the other side of the bed, her big eyes studying the sleeping boy's face. There was a tenderness in her expression that contrasted violently with the harshness that life on the streets usually imprinted on people. "Your mother, where is she now?" he asked gently. The girl's face darkened. "She left with my father 2 years ago. There was a lot of rain that night, and the cars were going too fast." The instant sympathy that the millionaire felt for the child surprised him. It had been a long time since he had connected emotionally with someone new, especially after losing his wife in similar circumstances. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "Have you been alone since then?" "Not completely alone," she replied, carefully reaching out to touch the boy's arm on the bed. "There are always people who need help, and when you help someone, you're never really alone." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. The boy's heart monitor emitted some erratic beeps, and his fingers twitched slightly. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but both the father and the street urchin noticed it immediately. "Did you see that?" whispered the millionaire, his heart racing. "I told you he could hear," replied the girl with a faint but genuine smile. "He's trying to come back. He just needs more time and fewer things that make him sleep too much." Before the millionaire could ask what she meant by that, quick footsteps echoed down the hall. Security had discovered the intrusion and was rapidly approaching the room. "You need to go," he said urgently. "But can you tell me your name?" The girl hesitated for a moment, as if the concept of having a name was strange to her. "People call me Little Shadow," she said finally, "because I appear and disappear without anyone noticing." When the security guards arrived at the room, they found only the millionaire sitting next to his son's bed, thoughtfully watching the heart monitor that still showed signs of slightly elevated activity. The girl had disappeared like a shadow, leaving behind only questions that were beginning to multiply dangerously in the minds of everyone involved. The head doctor convened an urgent meeting the following morning, his findings on the drug irregularities weighing like lead on his professional conscience. In the conference room, he presented charts and analyses that revealed a disturbing pattern. Someone was deliberately keeping the boy in a deep state of sedation beyond what was necessary. The levels of benzodiazepines in the child's blood are 3 times higher than prescribed, he explained to the small medical team present. "This isn't a dosage error, it's something systematic, calculated." The head nurse, a 50-year-old woman with 3 decades of experience, frowned. "Doctor, that would mean that someone with direct access to the patient is administering unauthorized medication. We need to check all the entry records to the room." While the medical investigation unfolded, the millionaire's stepmother arranged a meeting with the hospital administrator, a nervous man named Fernando, who always showed more concern for profits than for patients. His office, decorated with expensive furniture paid for with dividends from questionable investments, received the woman with the deference reserved for the most influential clients. "Ma'am, I perfectly understand your concern," said Fernando, adjusting the golden cuffs of his shirt. "Keeping a patient in intensive care for so long generates enormous costs, even for high-net-worth families. Perhaps it's time to consider more practical alternatives." The stepmother leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a calculated coldness. "My stepson is being influenced by inappropriate people. A street child gained access to the room yesterday, and now he's questioning sound medical decisions. I need you to keep the focus on what's best for everyone involved." "I understand perfectly," replied Fernando, his words loaded with undertones. "Sometimes the unnecessary prolongation of suffering benefits no one. I can assure you that our team will remain focused on the most appropriate protocols." On that same day, the little shadow once again managed to infiltrate the hospital, this time hiding in a laundry cart. Her instincts, sharpened by surviving on the streets, had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect dangers and opportunities. She knew that something was wrong, far beyond what she could express in words. Hidden in a supply closet near the boys' room, she watched through a crack as a nurse she didn't recognize entered the room in the middle of the night. The woman moved nervously, constantly looking down the hallways as she approached the IV drip. Little Shadow watched in horror as the nurse added something to the IV, a substance that came from a small vial hidden in her uniform pocket. The liquid mixed silently with the medication, and the nurse left quickly, leaving behind only the sound of the monitors and the boy's artificial breathing. The next morning, when the millionaire arrived for his daily visit, he found his son in an even deeper state of unconsciousness. The monitors showed stable vital signs, but there was a different quality to the silence in the room, as if life were gradually slipping away. "Doctor," he called when the head doctor made his morning rounds, "he seems more distant today. Is that possible?" The doctor examined the charts with growing concern. The levels of sedatives had spiked again overnight, despite no additional prescriptions being recorded. Someone was actively sabotaging the child's treatment. "I'm going to request a full investigation," he said gravely. "And there are external interferences happening here that need to be identified and stopped immediately." It was at that moment that Little Shadow emerged from her hiding place, her large eyes fixed on the doctor with an intensity that made the man remember the first time she had appeared. "The nurse with the yellow hair put something in his IV last night," she said simply, her voice carrying a certainty that could not be ignored. The millionaire turned abruptly. "You were here during the night?" "I always stay close," she replied. "The streets are dangerous, but there are dangers inside here too. They're just different, more hidden." The head doctor felt a chill run down his spine. If the child was telling the truth, it meant that there was an active conspiracy to keep the boy sedated, possibly until he died of complications related to prolonged coma. "Can you describe this nurse?" he asked urgently. Little Shadow closed her eyes, concentrating on the memory. She had yellow hair like the sun, but not a pretty yellow. It was a yellow that comes from bottles, and her hands were shaking when she put the liquid in the tube. She was very scared. The doctor exchanged a meaningful look with the millionaire. Only one nurse on the staff matched that description. Carla, a newly hired employee who had been personally recommended by the administrator, Fernando. "I need to do some checking," said the doctor, quickly leaving the room. Alone with the street urchin, the millionaire sat heavily in the chair next to his son's bed. The reality of what was happening began to form in his mind, and the magnitude of the betrayal made him nauseous. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. "Why are you risking so much to help someone you don't even know?" Little Shadow approached the window, watching the movement of the city below. "When my parents left, I got very sick with sadness. A very beautiful lady found me on the street and took me to eat something hot. She said she was going to help me find a new family." She paused, her small hands clenching into fists. "But before she could do that, the accident happened. She was in the car with you that night." The world stopped for the millionaire. His hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and he felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. You knew my wife?" "She had hair like chocolate and smiled even when she was crying," replied the girl, tears starting to form in her eyes. "She promised me that we were going to be a family, said your little boy needed a brave sister." The shock of the revelation hit the millionaire like an emotional tsunami. His wife had mentioned vaguely about helping a street child, but he was so absorbed in business problems at the time that he hadn't paid proper attention. "That's why you knew details about my son," he whispered, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "You were meant to be part of our family." At that moment, urgent footsteps echoed down the hall. The head doctor was returning with news that would confirm everyone's worst fears, and Little Shadow knew that time was running out quickly to save the boy who should have been her brother. The head doctor returned to the room with a grave expression, carrying documents that would confirm the most terrible suspicions. The nurse, Carla, had confessed under pressure, revealing a coordinated scheme to keep the boy in a coma until medical complications made his recovery impossible. The nurse was being blackmailed, he explained, handing the papers to the millionaire. "She has a daughter with expensive health problems, and someone offered to pay for all the treatments in exchange for her cooperation. When confronted with the evidence, she broke down and told everything." The millionaire examined the documents with trembling hands, each line revealing the depth of the betrayal he had suffered. Bank records showed significant transfers to the nurse's account, all originating from a shell corporation linked to his stepmother's investments. "There's more," continued the doctor. "We discovered that the medications had been tampered with for almost 2 months. Your son should have woken up from the coma weeks ago, but he was being artificially kept unconscious." Little Shadow, who had remained silent during the revelation, approached the bed and gently held the boy's hand. "Now that they've stopped giving him the bad medicine, how long until he wakes up? With proper treatment, a few days perhaps. But the damage from the medications may have caused complications that we haven't been able to fully assess yet." At that moment, the stepmother entered the room without knocking, her usual composure slightly shaken. She had heard rumors about the investigation and had come to assess the situation personally. "Darling, I heard there have been some misunderstandings with the medical team," she said, forcing a smile. "I hope they're not feeding you false hope about the boy's condition." The millionaire stood up slowly, the documents still in his hands. For the first time in years, he saw his stepmother with total clarity, realizing the calculating coldness that had always been there, masked by feigned concern. "The only misunderstandings here were about your true intentions," he said, his voice laden with a controlled anger that made the woman flinch instinctively. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, but her eyes were already searching for escape routes from the room. "Bank transfers, blackmailing employees, adulterated medications," he enumerated coldly, "all to ensure that my son never woke up, leaving you as the sole legal heir to the family assets." The mask of concern finally fell from the stepmother's face, revealing the true predatory nature that had always existed beneath the surface. "You can't prove any of this. It's just coincidences and suspicions." "Actually, we have all the necessary evidence," intervened the head doctor. "The nurse has provided complete details about how she was coerced, including recordings of conversations she made for her own protection." Little Shadow watched the unfolding confrontation with big, attentive eyes. There was something more she needed to reveal, a final piece of the puzzle that would change everything. "I saw you that night," she said suddenly, making everyone turn to her. "In the accident. You were there when the car crashed." The silence that followed was deafening. The stepmother paled visibly, her hands clenching into nervous fists. "A traumatized child is not a reliable witness," she said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. "You didn't try to help," continued the girl, her memories finally organizing with clarity. "You stood by in your blue car, talking on the phone. Then you left without calling for help." The implications of the revelation hit the millionaire like a lightning bolt. His wife had died not only in an accident, but possibly from the deliberate negligence of someone who could have saved her life. "You let her die," he whispered, the realization cutting through him like a blade. "She could have survived if you had called for help immediately." The stepmother tried to maintain her composure, but the evidence was piling up against her overwhelmingly. "These are fantasies of a disturbed child," You can't believe in... Her words were interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze, a low moan coming from the bed. The boy was beginning to stir, his eyes moving under his closed eyelids. The doctor rushed to check his vital signs, while the millionaire held his breath. Slowly, gradually, the boy's eyes opened, focusing with difficulty on his father's face. "Dad?" The voice was weak, but clear enough to be heard by everyone in the room. Tears of relief and joy streamed down the millionaire's face as he held his son's hand for the first time in months, feeling a warm response. "I'm here, my boy." "Dad's here." Little Shadow approached the bed, her eyes shining with genuine happiness. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm the sister your mommy promised to find for you." The boy smiled weakly, still confused, but clearly conscious. "Mommy talked about you. Said you were very brave." The stepmother, realizing that her position had become untenable, tried to quietly leave the room, but the doctor blocked her passage. "Authorities are on their way," he informed her. "There are serious questions that need to be resolved about medical interference and possible failure to render aid." 3 months later, the boy had fully recovered, as if the months of forced coma were just a distant nightmare. The millionaire, transformed by the experience, had honored the promise that his wife could not fulfill. Little Shadow now had a real name again and a family that loved her unconditionally. Her days on the streets were a painful memory, replaced by afternoons of playing in the mansion's garden and nights of shared stories. The stepmother faced criminal charges for multiple crimes, including medical interference and failure to render aid. Her greed had cost her not only her freedom, but also revealed the true nature of her character. The millionaire discovered that his greatest wealth was not in his investments or cryptocurrency ventures, but in the family that had been formed through adversity. The courage of a little girl had saved not only his son's life, but also his own soul, teaching him that sometimes angels come disguised as beggars and that true love can indeed move mountains. In the mansion that was now truly a home, 2 children grew up together, united by a tragedy that had turned into a blessing, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, hope and love can triumph over greed and evil. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.